Diana Furchtgott-Roth, a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute, who's going to discuss a paper she's just published on who actually owns the oil and gas companies that President Obama regularly singles out for higher taxation. Welcome, Diana.
It's great to be with you, Jason.
And I thought we'd start by listening to one of Obama's calls that have become pretty regular for, just one of his many frequent attacks on oil and gas companies. Let's listen.
Many, yes.
We've subsidized oil companies for a century. That's long enough. It's time to end the taxpayer giveaways to an industry that rarely has been more profitable and double down on a clean energy industry that never has been more promising.
Okay, I think that might have been at the State of the Union address earlier this year. So when President Obama calls for higher taxes, or closing loopholes, I think is the euphemism he prefers, on the oil and gas industry, I think many people assume he's singling out a few industrialists. But you say in your paper it's much more complicated than that. How so?
Well, it's not really complicated. You can look at the Securities and Exchange Commission filings, and directors and executives of the major oil companies own about 1% or less than 1% of the shares. Most of them are owned 99% or 99.5% are owned by ordinary Americans and foreigners. The Americans own them mostly in retirement accounts. So by raising taxes on the oil industry, the president would be hurting millions of hard-working Americans. And just to take the state of New York, the Employees' Pension Fund and the Teachers' Pension Fund, oil investments accounted for 5% of the assets of the fund, but 21% of the fund's return. And what that means is raising taxes on these companies hurts the state of New York employees and teachers.
So what you're saying is that the institutional owners of Exxon and Chevron are companies like Vanguard and T. Rowe Price who control these retirement accounts, correct?
Well, that's right. And there are so many of these institutional investors that none of them own more than 5% of, say, Exxon. It's usually 2 or 3%. So Vanguard might own about 4% of Exxon. Then there's State Street, there's Barclays, there's Fidelity. They own a small percentage of these companies in their portfolios. And most of these are retirement accounts because most of Americans' saving is tax-sheltered retirement savings through IRAs, 401ks, or pensions.
You also argue that Obama's proposals would put U.S. energy companies at a competitive disadvantage vis-a-vis foreign companies. How so?
Well, they definitely would, because already America has the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Capital and drilling rigs are mobile. They can just go, oil companies can go where tax rates are lower, where it's more profitable for them to invest. And that would hurt America because it means fewer jobs here for Americans. If you look at our refineries in the Gulf, if you look at oil drilling operations in the United States, they create many, many jobs for Americans. We've had unemployment rates over 8% for over 3 years in a row. And what we need to do is attract businesses and jobs to America, not send it overseas.
Okay, we've only got about a minute left, but I want to ask you, if we take the president's argument at face value, we take him at his word, do these energy companies enjoy benefiting from certain loopholes? What is he talking about when he talks about loopholes, and should these loopholes in fact exist?
Many of what he calls special tax breaks are not loopholes. Say the domestic deduction for manufacturing that he wants to repeal, gaining about $12 billion over 10 years. That deduction is in place for all domestic manufacturing. Most domestic manufacturers have a 9% deduction. Oil companies have a 6% deduction. The president wants to take that away. So he's singling out oil companies for adverse special treatment. And then the intangible drilling costs, the non-salvageable costs, that oil companies now have a deduction for. That's like the pharmaceutical companies who get to write off investments in drugs that don't pan out. No one says these companies, pharmaceutical companies, shouldn't write off research costs. So this is a provision that other companies have that the president is trying to take away from oil companies.